He brought his son to the hospital, but it was already too late. 6-year-old Corey Micciolo was acting strangely after a nap, slurring his words, stumbling, and barely able to stay awake. His father rushed him to the hospital, but during a routine CT scan, Corey began seizing violently. Moments later, he was dead. The cause? Blunt force trauma. The autopsy ruled his death a homicide. But this wasn't the first red flag. Just 1 month earlier, Corey's father had already been arrested for child endangerment after a disturbing pattern of alleged abuse. And now, Corey's mother has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against New Jersey's Child Protection Agency. She says they ignored her cries for help, despite her filing dozens of reports and even a last-minute emergency custody order just days before Corey died. She tried to save him. The system didn't listen.
They're going to have a tough road here getting that direct evidence to say that he caused the death. Because you have an instance where he was making him run on a treadmill and he kept falling. And if the father says that happened again here and he must have hit his chest and it caused some kind of compressions, and then once he went and he had that internal damage, it wasn't from me abusing my son. It was from me pushing my son because he wanted to work out and wanted to get stronger. And this was me encouraging him to do that. So this is a case where it may come down to, are we allowed to push our children, and how far can we push them? Not necessarily abuse in a technical sense where you see someone actually physically hitting.
He said his 6-year-old son was too fat, so he made him run until he died. New Jersey father Christopher Gregor has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for the death of his 6-year-old son, Corey Micciolo, a child he forced onto a treadmill over and over again until his little body gave out. Security footage shows Gregor increasing the treadmill speed as Corey runs, stumbles, and falls. Each time, he picks Corey up and throws him back on, faster, harder. At one point, he even appears to bite his son on the head. The crime didn't happen in one night. It was a pattern of abuse, one that ended in Corey collapsing during a nap, vomiting, slurring his speech, and seizing in the hospital. He never woke up.
The child's body just not holding up to that. Now can the parent be responsible for putting a child in that situation?
100% going to put the mother of the child on the stand. She had filed a bunch of reports. She can testify as to what she witnessed, the basis for those reports here. I don't think this is going to be as hard to make that connection with the mother's testimony, with the reports she made, as well as with the medical examiner testifying to the injuries and that the child was with him around the time frame. So I think that it's going to be as hard as stated. I do believe also we still have the treadmill incident, which there's a video, which we do know that juries do like that type of evidence.
The autopsy told the truth. Corey didn't die by accident. Initially, Gregor was only charged with child endangerment after Corey died, but after months of investigation and a report from the state's expert witness, everything changed. Corey had blunt force trauma to his chest and abdomen.
The visibly emotional Christopher Gregor walking out of the emergency room while nurses were scrambling to keep his son, Corey Micciolo, alive.
What did the defendant say about Corey's symptoms before he was brought into the emergency room?
That he had been vomiting and he was complaining of leg and body pain.
Did the defendant leave room 6 of the emergency room?
He did.
And what was Corey's condition?
Corey was very sick. He mumbled a couple words to me.
The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide. Prosecutors charged Gregor with murder, later downgraded to aggravated manslaughter. They say he abused his son as punishment because Corey's mother, Brianna Micciolo, was late dropping him off. During the 6-week trial, Gregor claimed innocence. But the footage, the medical evidence, and Corey's own words to doctors before he died, saying his dad made him run because he was too fat, told a different story. She called him a monster in court, and she was right. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to 6-year-old Corey Micciolo's chest and abdomen. His death was ruled a homicide caused by chronic child abuse. Prosecutors said his father, Christopher Gregor, showed no emotion at the hospital. Surveillance footage captured him calmly walking out and driving away just minutes after Corey was pronounced dead.
I appear before you today not only as a grieving mother, but also an advocate for justice. On behalf of my son Corey, I stand here before you to plead for justice that Corey rightfully deserves and to press for the maximum sentence of Christopher Gregor, whose actions have inflicted irreparable harm in our lives. For you to fully understand the gravity of the situation, I will flash back to the July of 2013. This day marks the beginning of a traumatic journey defined by manipulation, abuse, and ultimately an unspeakable loss. At 16, I first met the defendant, who was 21 at the time. He proceeded to feed me drugs, alcohol, and took complete advantage of me, which led to the conception of Corey. From day one of my pregnancy, I knew I would keep Corey regardless of the way he was conceived. Corey didn't ask to be brought into this world, and I knew I owed it to him to bring him into this world with unconditional love. Corey was and still is my life, my world, and my everything. I would also like to speak about my past, which I am not 100% proud of. You heard a lot about it throughout the trial, and so did a lot of the world. It was very upsetting for that to come out because I've worked extremely hard for many years to be where I am today. I admit I abused drugs, but during the trial it was made out that for some reason my son deserved to be killed because his mom was a drug addict. That is absolutely disgusting.
He ignored 3 phone calls from Corey's mother, and investigators say that within the hour he was already Googling, "Can your phone be traced in airplane mode?" and "Can my car be tracked?" Days later, the searches got darker. Gregor looked up what could cause internal bleeding, how autopsy findings lead to charges, and what might explain elevated blood sugar. Investigators found over 3,000 deleted text messages between him and Corey's mother. Earlier that same day, he called the state's child abuse hotline to accuse Corey's mother of being a drug addict and claimed the boy was being coached to lie. But Corey's mother had been begging for help long before that call.
I stand here today, clean and sober, and I know Corey would be so proud of me. Unfortunately, my son is no longer here to tell his story. I don't believe a word he said, and I don't accept any apologies. He has no remorse for any of the actions he committed. And his only remorse, like you saw today, was for himself because he got caught and convicted. Everything he had done to Corey was done out of spite towards me. Another reason I could think of is he's sick in the head and used Corey as his punching bag. On April 2nd of 2021, it was not the first time that he abused Corey, but it was the last time. He never had an ounce of love for Corey. And to the defendant, Corey was just an inconvenience in his life. He never hugged him. He never praised him. He never told him he was proud of him or that he did a good job. He punished Corey every chance that he could get, and I cannot even begin to imagine what my son dealt with behind closed doors with this man. On April 2nd of 2021, I hesitantly dropped Corey off at the defendant's home, which is a mistake that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I kissed my son goodbye unknowingly for the last time. I wish I knew what was going to happen and I would never let him go. At 3 p.m. the same day, I received a phone call from the defendant where he stated Corey was very sick and he was taking him to the hospital, and then hung up on me after he asked for my insurance card. As an extremely concerned mother, I called him back with no answer and continued to do so along with texts for hours to find out where Corey was and what was going on. For those few hours, my mother and I called every hospital in the area with no luck. The very last hospital finally said he was there. Then there was a knock on the door. It was our local police there to tell me Corey had passed away.
She filed multiple abuse reports, shared photos of Corey's bruises and bite marks, and even filed an emergency custody request, denied just days before her son died. She says Corey would return from visits with injuries and once told a doctor he was forced to run because he was too fat. Still, Child Protective Services took no action.
Decision, Mr. Gregor. And at this time, can you tell me what that is?
I will not testify, Your Honor.
I ask that you please consider all of the evidence presented in and out of this courtroom when making your decision today. I ask you to sentence me fairly, taking into consideration my entire life, and not just based on the 12 days. Thank you.
Gregor's attorneys claimed Corey died of pneumonia, not abuse. But the forensic pathologist testified otherwise, citing blunt force injuries, a lacerated heart, contusions on the liver and heart, and signs of long-term trauma, including sepsis.
Corey was a beautiful 6-year-old whose life was taken from him, and there's nothing that I am going to be able to say that is more important than the facts that came out in this courtroom, and more important as to what the defendant did. It is difficult to think about the suffering that Corey had to endure both during his life and during his death. It is difficult to contemplate the fear that he must have lived with every single day, doing the little things in life and even doing the simple things every time that he was with his father.
The jury didn't buy the excuses. The judge sentenced Gregor to 20 years for aggravated manslaughter and 5 more for child endangerment, to be served consecutively. That means no early release until he serves at least 85% of his sentence.
Christopher Gregor abused his son. He ended his life. And then he left him alone in the hospital to die. One can only imagine what was going through Corey's mind in those last moments. One could only imagine how scared he was, how confused that he was, how truly abandoned that he felt. And there is simply no mitigation for those actions. Aggravating factor number 1 applies. The defendant's actions were cruel and depraved beyond the elements of the offense. In regard to the endangering, Your Honor, Corey didn't merely run on a treadmill and fall. He fell. The defendant bit him on the head, and he fell 5 more times. In regard to the ending of his life, Corey suffered a laceration to his heart, but those were not the only injuries. He also had a lacerated liver and a bruise to his lungs. He suffered multiple injuries. While Corey was at the apartment, he vomited, he defecated, he endured suffering. While Corey was fighting for his life, the defendant took a selfie, not even having the decency to put a shirt on Corey. While Corey's body was shutting down, the defendant ordered food. When Corey was going into cardiac arrest, the defendant was more concerned about the date that he had set up for that night. The defendant didn't call 911, he didn't call a doctor, he didn't call an ambulance, he did nothing. And this added to the suffering that that little boy had to undergo. The defendant then throws Corey in the back seat of the car, where he is left all alone. Whose car was that?
That's my car.
And there was also an adult male located on the surveillance video. And can you tell the jury who that was?
The defendant.
And there was also a child located on the surveillance video. Can you tell the jury who that is?
My son Corey.
Does that video accurately depict when you dropped Corey off to his father's apartment complex gym on March 20th, 2021 at approximately 4:15 p.m.?
Yes.
Now, there was a timestamp located on the video, correct?
Correct.
And is that accurate within an approximate reasonable time?
Yes.
Permission to publish videos B, C, and D, Your Honor.
Granted.
Thank you. just going to move to the next video, which would be S18C for purposes of the record.
Very good.
Your Honor, permission to publish video D, please. Brianna, who is the child located in that video?
That's Corey.
And how old was Corey in that video?
He was 6.
And who is the adult male located in that video?
The defendant.
And again, you're familiar with that area.
Yes.
Now, when was the first time that you ever saw that video?
A few weeks ago.
And have you ever had possession of that video?
No.
Your Honor, there's no further questions for the witness at this time.